Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Curator Brain Meet AI Brain. I'm Nathan Atkinson. I am your MC for this session. To quickly introduce myself, I work at Local Projects. We're a design firm in New York City, and I'm on the board of directors of MCM. I'm just starting my third year, and it's been a fantastic experience. I recommend it to everyone. You probably know this, but if you're brand new to MCN, MCN is a nonprofit, volunteer-run organization that is committed to growing the digital capacity of museum professionals. MCM has a deep, active, and awesome community that's engaged 365 days a year in conversations, webinars, and resource sharing. So I hope you all stay active and involved beyond our extended virtual 3-week conference this year. If you become a member, you can join the special interest groups, which we call SIGs, participate in the membership program, and help us all shape MCN's future. So if you're not already a member, I hope you join us. And I would love to thank Microsoft, who is our Registration Assistance Fund sponsor, Axial, the Ignite sponsor, and all the other sponsors. So moving on to today's session. This is a Q&A, so I hope you have all watched the pre-recorded presentation. We'll be using the chat box for questions, so you can lob a question my way one of two ways. You can put your name in the chat box and I will call on you and you can ask your question that way. Or if you just want to go ahead and type it, I will work through the questions in order. And so with that, I will pass it over to our panelists and let them introduce themselves.
Excellent. I guess I'm up first in the introduction line. So thank you everyone for for attending this virtual Q&A. We appreciate it. So my name is Matt Elliott. I work at the Henry Ford. I'm the head of creative and digital experience. So any questions kind of around, I guess, on the Henry Ford side and design and kind of that process and how we worked kind of hand in hand with Bluecadet in the project, I will be happy to field those.
And I'm Ellice Engdahl. I am also at the Henry Ford. I am our digital collections and content manager. So I oversee our collections digitization process. I'm our SME for collections content and data. And then on this project, I also was kind of coordinating a lot of the content work that the curators were doing on the project. So I'm happy to answer any questions about data, collections data. The more technical questions should go to Ben, but questions about our collections data or how that integrated with our collection stories and our work with the curators.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brett Renfer, Creative Director at Bluecadet. And so I led the creative strategy of actually most of the stuff we did with Henry Ford. So we've been working together for, I don't know, Matt, what, 4 years now or something like that? I feel like I increase it every time we have an MCN. So happy to answer really any questions around the creative intent, what we're excited about for AI now and in the future, or any questions around the interaction kind of in concert with Ben. Ben and I did a lot of the prototyping you saw in the video. I'm just excited to dig in with everybody. There's a lot to talk about.
Likewise, yeah. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm the tech director at Bluecadet in the New York office. And like Brett was saying, I was also working on the table, both on the machine learning side, but also on the architectural side, trying to integrate all the data and make all the pieces fit together. So I'd be excited to talk about anything in the weeds, technical, data pipeline, or related to the project, or if you have any other questions related to that, happy to answer them. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Did you want to give any kind of intro to the project, or should we dive in with some questions?
I can give a quick kind of intro while we're waiting for people to kind of queue up questions. Hopefully, and I want to talk over a slide because that just makes me more comfortable. I'm just going to share this sort of like GIF here. So I think for us, really, we spent a lot of time, and you can see it in the kind of talk, trying to take a lot of data, a lot of stories, a lot of connections, and this really amazing, diverse, kind of crazy collection at the Henry Ford, and distill it down to something that was kind of technically powerful and experientially playful and simple. And this is like the craziest thing you can do with it, which is make this endless swirl of connections that span, the entire most of the digital collection at Henry Ford. But mostly you just spend a lot of time making and breaking and tapping and playing. And AI is a piece of that puzzle, but it's really the kind of curator stories. And I know a lot of people, if you worked on digital experiences at museums or when you did, you have all these aspirations and ideas for making an experience that once you put pen to paper becomes so complicated and crazy. And our kind of story that we told in the presentation is about like whittling down and finding a focus and finding a way to to stay simple in a way. So I think that's the piece we're really excited about with where we landed here. But it was not a linear process, as everyone I'm sure kind of understands. So, and I think for us, we do feel like it was kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as, using AI as a piece of experience like this. But we strongly believe that, now in a couple years, it's still imperative that this is a human and collection and narrative driven story rather than a core AI story. While THF remains not an AI museum.
Great. I actually have a question. In your talk, you use a quote that I love that kind of can be a brief, I think, for all of us in all of our work, to amplify the best of technology and the best of humanity. And so I'd like to know for this experience specifically, what do you think those were? Meaning, what do you think the best use of technology meeting the best use of humanity was?
Ben, you first.
So I was unmute at the same time. It's always a little bit of like a hands up. That's a great question. Yeah, and I think there are so many different facets to that question that I probably won't be able to answer it right away. But from me being the tech director, I think one of the exciting things about AI in the beginning was, and this was a very naive sort of way to go into it, was thinking you just feed it a bunch of data and it somehow magically sorts it and provides you with something meaningful out of, with that. And that was just not true. So it took us a while to actually chisel away and figure out what is the most interesting thing that AI can do. And I think we're already seeing one question from David, hi, about going into a similar realm of that conflict of really trying to figure out what's valuable about applying AI and what's valuable about or what do we want to retain about the curatorial process. And one thing that we did realize is that a lot of things that we were trying to do with AI was replicating these curatorial processes, whereas what it was actually really good at from our point of view was surfacing new connections that didn't necessarily have a historical context, but allowed us to really branch out and deal with a lot more data than humans could actually. So for example, if you look at the ratio of amount of collection objects that we have on the table versus the ones that are sort of manually curated to actually have a narrative that's meaningful in the historical context or in the way that it's been collected at the museum, that's fairly small. But they kind of go hand in hand. Just because there are more connections that the AI can create, it doesn't necessarily mean they're more meaningful, but it does create this nice balance where you can oscillate between the vastness of the collection and all these interesting small stories. So from my perspective, that's sort of where the both on this table experience where both of those really started to shine. It's like the breadth and the depth.
Go ahead, Ellice.
Well, I was going to say, just to follow on with that, and I think this might get to David's question a little bit too, I think the thing that we really, from the start probably, and then kind of meandered and tried some different things and then came back around to it, was we do have this really broad collection. I know, again, for people who watched the presentation, you saw the slide, we have a historical village with 80 buildings in it. We have trains, we have cars, we have design, we have glass artwork, we have pretty much American history is what we have. And it's just this insanely broad collection. And so that's a question we get a lot, is like, well, why would the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation have insert name of thing here? So I think, to me, that's kind of the best of humanity. Like, we wanted to sort of explain that without like, here is a didactic paragraph that tells you why all these things go together. Because we honestly have those conversations internally as well. Like, why does this thing fit into the collection? Why does this thing fit into the collection? As a 90-year-old collection, things accrete over time. So I think that's one output that everybody's really pleased about, is showing how our collections really do fit together, even though they seem so disparate when you look at them.
And I think like some of our original initial concepts around having AI was that, you know, we would try to do like a 50-50 split, right? Like as a table experience, like we want to tell these curated stories, but we also want to see what stories AI can tell. And as Ben kind of alluded to earlier, you know, that wasn't the case. So as we kind of figured out how AI plays into this, like we knew that obviously our curatorial angle would be strong and solid. So in that kind of talking to the curators side, we were able to kind of talk them through the experience, like as we went through it. You know, first kind of the approach of like, hey, we're thinking it's this 50-50 thing. And then the more we dug in and kind of were transparent with them in the process, obviously like we knew that wouldn't be the case, and it would, you know, and it would have these amazing and magical AI, you know, ML moments. But a lot of it is also driven by the fact that, you know, our curators put all of this stuff together, and then we have these really great, amazing threads that kind of pull from here and there using AI.
Yeah, I think the only thing I have to add is just that we, from the start, knew that we wanted it to be highly interactive and let people play a piece in that story. And that was a great challenge to all like the really cool AI-based visualizations we made, which were not interactive, right? They just like look cool, and you don't get to that, you know, that depth, or even, and really you kind of barely get the breadth story. So one thing I was thinking about is there's this electronic musician from the 70s, Laurie Spiegel, who would take issue with me even calling her an electronic musician, because she talked about how she made folk music. She was like, I make folk music, I just happen to use synthesizers. And so she was all about like, it's not about the tool, it's about the output. And I think that was the sort of us getting past the shyness and excitement of the technology and getting into the like, great, this is a tool to augment this bigger story we're trying to tell that can only be told by people.
That's great. I think wrapped into that were 3 or 4 answers to David's question. So let's move on to this one from Kelsey. She says, the interface you came up with is really beautiful and feels really artistic. I totally agree. So how did you balance the aesthetic design with the collection content and functionality? And were there any concerns that it would be more fun to play with versus just purely educational?
I can start, and then Matt, if you want to jump in as well. I mean, I think there's kind of a few pieces to this. One, we had the luxury of this being a part of a suite of experiences, both here and kind of throughout the museum that we've been working on together. So we were able to say like, hey, we're doing this like pretty heavily didactic, some areas that actually were more of like a mix of a physical exhibit with linear media, some things that are really doing more telling than showing. And so it's like, this is the place where we really dial up the fun. But I think for everything, like, because it was so much about starting with one object, then exploding to the collection and seeing all the different ways this could go, we wanted there to be no wrong way to experience it. So it works if you tap, if you drag your hand, if you smash all of your fingers down. And that was before we even really knew where it was. We're like, this is an experiential principle. There's no wrong way to interact with this. And because it's so much about showcasing the mess, the beautiful mess that Ellice is talking about, we were kind of like, we need to lean into that. So it was never kind of a worry that it was going to be too fun, because we're allowed to be too fun. And we kind of felt like everything we were doing was pushing towards that bigger story. And then all of the other kind of aesthetic and interactive flourishes you see are just kind of guiding you. You know, it's about no matter what you do or no matter your level of ability, you're getting some kind of reward for your interaction. So if you drag your hand along and maybe you can't read, or maybe you don't want to like dive in, you just get this beautiful color that's kind of attracting and rewarding you and just giving you this kind of compliment to the objects and connections you're uncovering.
I don't know if my answer is quite as robust as Brett's, but we were, I think on the Henry Ford side, we were all in on this being fun. You know, we knew the content was going to be cool. We had seen some early kind of ideas from Bluecadet around design, but we were definitely all in on this just being a fun, interactive experience that, you know, you could participate easily on that fun level, or you can kind of hang out and dive in and get more and more and more into the experience. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think just that one flavor to that was all that data was there, and actually a lot of it was presented on the table. So there are still opportunities for visitors to drill down, and I think we even went so far as Ellice to add sort of object keys, right? That very advanced users might be able to refer to collection items with. So it's sort of a way for us to try to focus on the playful aspect to lure people in, and then let people dive deeper and deeper as they like.
Yeah, I think Ben referenced in the beginning the number of objects that are curated by actual curators versus the number that are just there. And it's something like under 800 or actually have those connections. And then there's like 25,000 plus on the table. So that kind of shows you the scale. So the AI can handle 25,000, but the curators could handle 800, you know, which again, kind of gets back to like, what's the value of each?
On the subject of data, actually, Rigoberto asks what kind of data was built into your AI. And I think you did have a slide about this, but maybe someone can just recap it briefly. And I'm interested in knowing how you excluded the data that you decided not to use, or maybe it was the other way around, the data that really attracted you and you said, okay, this is where it's at. We're going to focus on this data.
Ellice, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to go high level?
And I can jump in.
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot of debate about this, and so in order, first of all, what you can see on the table are two sort of lenses into the collection. One is you start with an object and then you land at another object, and in between it shows you objects that are visually similar. So if you have a chair and you have a tractor, it'll show you objects that sort of morph from the chair slowly into the tractor. And that sort of just builds a visual connection through the collection. And that data is all based on the images that are coming in. And then we added another much more sort of playful and superficial lens, which is just based on color, right? So you start with something red and then end at a blue object, and then you kind of have that gradient in colors. That actually sounds super simple, but there was a lot of debate about what we use for these visual threads, because not all artifacts are visually that easy to decipher. So there's a lot of debate with Ellice and the team. You know, do we include photographs or do we include 2D objects in general? Like, and there are a lot of beautiful design objects that are you know, prints and textiles and things like that, but they don't necessarily read as well in these kind of scenarios. So that was a careful conversation that happened over, I want to say even months, Ellice, right, to sort of iterate and see what yields interesting results as a visitor experience, but what sort of maintains the authenticity of the collection.
Yeah, and to me, it's really interesting too, because I think it wasn't just a like answer the question and then dump the data in and then we're done. Like it was this back and forth between like, you know, it'd be like, well, what if we did this? And then Ben would take it off and kind of play with it and start tweaking algorithms, like start tweaking search so that like what, you know, I think it was like not acceptable for us to not have any black and white photos, just because that, you know, we're a 90-year-old institution. Most of our photos are black and white photos, and most of what we have is photos. So like it wasn't necessarily acceptable to exclude all of those, but then how do you make it so that not, you know, 3/4 of what you see is black and white photos, but raising those when they need to be raised, and then giving them something interesting to do with the AI. Instead of just, you know, hey, a black and white photo looks an awful lot like this next black and white photo looks an awful lot like this next black and white photo. So it was this back and forth. And that's, again, it's the interesting part. It's like we have 100,000 objects digitized, and 1/4 of them are on the table, because again, the other 3/4 are mostly black and white photos. So, you know, there's still a sort of manual process. Basically what we've been doing is all of our digitized objects, so if it's a 3-dimensional object, those are all on the table. But if it's 2-dimensional, then it kind of depends on, does it have some color? You know, is it a black and white photo? Is it one of like 1,000 racing photos that's on the same race? Yeah, maybe we wouldn't include all of those. So there still is a little bit of a manual process to kind of figure out like which things are appropriate for this experience. It's not just like dump it all in and let the AI mix it up.
Yeah, and that last piece is, I mean, that's what's so different about doing something for an in-museum experience that's part of this larger kind of story about how the collection's interconnected, that the decisions we made to kind of like curate the AI, I guess, to continue to play off of our title, were in the service of experience in this space. I think we would do something different and more open-ended if this were kind of like an online digital collection where you can kind of like, you know, tweak and tune. You kind of have one shot to say like, hey, we're nearing the end of this curator strand, or we're at this moment to provide a nice fork in the road for, you know, the end user. Let's make this really beautiful or really compelling, or really stretch across the collection in a way that's really unexpected. Rather than if you're online, you're like, I don't like that result, I'm gonna change this, I'm gonna change this, you know, doing that kind of back and forth, that we might be able to give more raw results.
And I think to that point too, again, it's we have a really robust digital collections. Like we didn't want to just have that on the floor. Like you already can have that on the floor with your phone, right? Like it's mobile friendly. So you know, I think this was a different thing, and maybe again, David, this speaks to your recent question. I'm like, unfortunately, we don't have really analytics because we didn't get to open it because there was this pandemic. And it's a touch experience. So, and I know that's a thing I'm sure we could talk about for half an hour just by itself. But I think the thought was always, this is not something people are gonna wanna stand there on their feet when they're in an 800,000 square foot museum with many other interesting things to look at and like spend tons of time. You know, if you really wanna dig into our digital collections, online is the best place to do it. But that this was supposed to be a fun, light experience, that you're not digging too deep. We just didn't want to, again, this was another conversation we had as far as like what metadata to show. We didn't want people to be frustrated that they didn't understand what a thing was, but we also didn't necessarily want to say, here's every piece of knowledge that we have about each artifact.
I'm scanning the questions here, and actually Mitch is going to take us back to the beginning. What was the brief for this? And was AI built into it from the beginning, or did that come later?
I'm trying to remember, Brett. I don't know, to be honest. I know that it's something that we definitely had kind of very early on as an idea. So the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation, we've kind of designated this larger project has been this space to be the intersection of innovation. So it's kind of physically in the middle of the museum, and we've kind of focused it on innovation and I don't know, kind of speaking to the connectedness of our collection, as Ellice kind of mentioned earlier, like why do we have all these kind of seemingly disparate things, and how they all connect, and what kind of innovation stories that they tell. So we knew that AI, we kind of wanted AI to be a part of that because it's innovative, right? And we also knew that we didn't want to like chase tech, as you know. I mean, we say this over and over, and then you kind of find yourself sometimes doing it. So I think early on we did a little bit, but I think that, you know, it was definitely involved early on. We just didn't know how and to what levels.
Yeah, I think it was more of like the AI was a hypothesis. I think there was this it was a piece that Matt's describing, we're at this kind of like crossroads of the museum. So it's a chance to say, here's how, before you go into these different areas that are about a specific collection or a specific theme, here's this moment that kind of like tries to tie everything together. And the other experiences around it are, some are more linear. So it's like, let me explain this one connection to you and dive deep on, prototypes across fashion, across design, or across agriculture, et cetera. And this became this idea of like, well, let's have one experience within this puzzle it's a more open-ended, that says, hey, if this is about individual connections, here's a demonstration or a playground to see the entire collection connected all at once. That was our kind of jumping off point, and so, well, we need to do something algorithmically to make this happen. And we did a really early prototype where Ellice just sent me a huge cache of images, and we just kind of started playing with it to see if it was interesting. And so it was really that was the start of the process, as we had kind of like a visualization made. It's actually the one that's in the presentation, made with AI. And we said, this is really interesting. It's not a cool interactive experience, and it doesn't do what we want, but it is really provocative. And that was kind of like our beginning to kind of almost take a huge step back into the underlying strategy, but knowing that we had something kind of compelling to start with there, with a little machine learning and AI in the mix.
All right, time flies. Wow, we are approaching the end of this session, but you knew you wouldn't be able to get out of this without a question about analytics. So we have one about comparing the analytics for deep dives versus the connections along the chain. How did that play out?
Yeah, absolutely. I tried to get ahead of a couple of the questions in the chat, and I'll just sort of paraphrase here that we do have that data, and we're hoping to collect a lot of that. But since the table installed right before the lockdown, or actually it finished install at the first day of lockdown when the museum was closed, we haven't been able to collect meaningful data. Our hypothesis is that it's going to be the majority of people are going to be using this on a shallow basis. And then, the deeper dive is going to be for the folks who really want to drill down and might be looking for very specific object info.
Great. Before we all wrap up, Brett, in the talk, I think you gave some kind of mysterious mention of something about a donut. Is that right? Can you tell us what that's about?
Ellice can probably do a better job of telling it, but it was a object that we kept coming back to, that even in the Curator generated maps, there's a, how is it old? Is it 200-year-old donut that's in the collection? Is that correct, Ellice? Or 150?
About 100, I think, a little over.
So it's a 100-year-old donut that's and was donated as an object in memoriam of a person. And so when we had a lot of these connections about oddities, connections about death, connections about humanity, a lot of roads lead to the donut, believe it or not.
Wow. This is a food donut. This is a food product. This is edible.
Yep. So I think that's just such a good example for, an AI would never guess that, right? So there's more meaning than just an image or tags with this one.
I just put a link to the donut in the chat if you want to check it out. So it's actually a really touching story. So it's worth reading the little blurb on it.
I mean, I think that's maybe one of the best examples of what can happen with AI that's unexpected. You wouldn't, it shows you something that you maybe didn't know was there. It suggests that there's a deeper story to dig into. So really, I think donuts are a great place to end. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I don't want to keep you later, but thanks to all of our presenters. So go forth and AI.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. And thanks, Nathan.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.